Coming around the corner, I was a whistling girl, and there was the man, Mr. Murphy, and he'd always say, "Whistling women, crowing hens all come to a bad end." That was the same as and all that. But we'd always have. I had conversations with him, and there was an English woman, Aunt B. And with her family, we'd go in when we'd come from Bible study with my mother, and I'll stop in, and we'd have tea and that kind of thing. So it was that kind of experience in North Adams. It was hard being in the classroom when it came to geography and history, okay, and being the only African-American child in a classroom. And then, so we talk about Uncle Tom's Cabin and books like Little Black Sambo. And then we get into Africa and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty early on, it seemed, in those school years. Mm-hmm. So that was the only times when there was any feelings being different. In North Adams, I feel I had various mentors because I sang. I would go to various people would have teas. Back in the day, they had teas. Different organizations, different groups of people. My aunt, I called her Wixie. Her name was Mrs. Wicks, but I called her Wixie. And she was my, I would say, spiritual mother. Wow. Because she's the one that used to take me to the Black church in Troy, New York. And we'd go there and it would be like we'd be there Sunday all day long kind of thing. And at her house, that's where we sang and sang and sang. Wow. We would have days, we'd go there during the summer and we'd be singing all day long. Her and her two daughters were my best friends there.
So when did you move to Pittsfield?
In 1968.
Yeah. So you remember... So when Martin Luther King was...
Oh, yeah, when he died. And I think the hardest times were when the bombing of the church in Alabama, the 4 little girls. And then, I grieved just as much as anybody else when Kennedy was shot, and killed. And all that. Actually, I was carrying my 5th child, going on my way to the doctor when the news came over. So I think with the series of murders and all of that kind of thing, it was a great impact. And it was like I had to decide what am I going to do in Williamstown, because when he died, it was like fell on my knees, and it was like I got to do something to make a difference. And so I made a decision to move to Pittsfield.
Anytime there was some youth and they needed a youth volunteer, my mother volunteered me. And, she would always say, you're a pastor, you're the pastor's son, so people are watching you. You have to behave accordingly. I used to eat lunch in the school cafeteria, but there was a white girl that they become friends. And I think this was like 4th grade. Her name was, I still remember her name, and her name was Loretta Staller. And she said she invited me home for lunch. And we had lunch, and I remember her mother called Loretta into the kitchen and said, you shouldn't have brought him here. She said, we don't do that in this house. So I knew what she was talking about. That's why, it became obvious to me that, prejudice is taught. Kids play and get along, they get along fine. But when adults get involved in it, that's when all these prejudice ideas and thoughts come about. My dad was very active in civil rights. We had Martin Luther King come to his church in around 65, and he spoke. The church at this time was in the middle of a Chicago project called Cabrini Greens, which was a tough neighborhood. So it was an exciting time. When I was like 12, I was thinking about being a minister. And then when I became 15, that was kind of like the turning point. I knew I could never have the dedication to the ministry that he had. Around that time, I was starting to develop, my philosophy of life and, what I wanted myself to be. So the Bible was a big influence because of my dad's. There was a poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If." I memorized that at the time, and I thought that kind of had an impact. If you keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blame it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, will make allowances for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, being lied about, don't deal in lies, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. That was the first verse, and that had an impact. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or talk with kings nor lose the common touch. If neither friend nor loving foe can hurt you, if all men count but none too much. So I started to live those kind of things.
I was what they call Navy brat, and I traveled quite a bit. I was in 13 elementary schools. I got a big scholarship on a Du Bois scholarship to go to Simon Jock at 15. So at 15, I started my college career and came up to the Berkshires. I loved my high school Spanish teacher, and best friend was from the Philippines, and so just the smell of the food, walking into the house, learning about the food, learning about their history. Again, in the classes I was in, they were predominantly white, but Maria was also in them. So having another comrade in that scenario was good. So, if you flash forward, I was doing sort of the Berkshire shuffle, always of teaching and, all different types of places. And so there was an immigrant population, and I spoke Spanish, so that I was always in those communities. And I thought I knew them. So when I was on my last pregnancy and I had to be on bed rest. So I was like, what can I do? What can I do from home? And that's when I got certified as an interpreter and translator. So I was translating schools' IEPs and interpreting for VIM and CHP and places I've been working and helping with other projects, teaching Spanish classes and things like that. So I then met all these people that I didn't know were in the community that I thought I was connected with. And then they wanted more things from me and my co-founder, Marta. So they wanted to help signing up in bank accounts, how to do this, how do you save money, who can buy a house, and it just felt, and when you're actually an interpreter, you're not allowed to talk about anything but what you're there for. So it was an interesting, what can we build that we can help serve this population better and also help the agencies serve these people better. So that's where the thought started. And then as we were developing the thought, I became more aware of the diversity in Southern Berkshire. Interpreting at VIM, people would get upset if they were white, native-born people that were illiterate, and say, "Why are you helping these people? I need help." And so I remember I was like, "Oh," so Bridge became immediately, we're going to be, accessible to all versus an immigrant advocacy program. I kept my husband up lots of nights, and really hard stories, just hard things that you didn't think were in the Berkshires. And so I was like, oh, this is what I studied, right? In my languages and literature, women's studies. I traveled to Mexico to interview photographers for my thesis in Simon's Rock, and really got interested in images of women and Western feminism versus, matriarchies that existed still and that sort of escaped colonialism. So that's what my thesis was on. So when it became real life, that's sort of the foundation and the vision of Bridge, and it sort of is everything that I've been doing from the military through now.
I remember that one of the last places we were in the South was in Henderson, North Carolina. We lived one house in from the southern block, and on the corner there was a white family that lived there. So we lived right next to a white family. And there were 3 boys in that family, and there were 3 boys in our family. And we played together all the time. And my brother, my middle brother, St. Clair, was head of the group. On Saturdays, we would get together and we'd say, oh, we got to go to the movies today. So we would walk up and down the railroad tracks and pick up these the nails or piece of iron, take them over to the junkyard, sell it, and get about, I don't know, 10 cents each. Of course, it was a heavily segregated area. And so we had our back door and upstairs that we went. And then the kids next door, they'd go in the front. But then up in the balcony, even though there was a partition, you know, we'd go right up there and sit right at the partition. Could talk to one another. When we came up north back, I can't remember the year exactly, we lived in October Mountain in Lee. But the business was in Lenox. And we went to school at Lee Grammar School, Central School. In order to get to school, we had to walk approximately 2.5 miles. Well, we'd walk down the hill, cross the bridge, and catch the school bus right there, and then go to school in Lee. It's in bad weather. We could we could get on the sleds, and we could go down that hill all the way to the bus stop. But then it was tough at night. Well, after high school, we 3 boys decided to try out for one of the major league teams, baseball. So my brother Saint had this great big old Buick convertible. So we piled into that, and we went off up to up in New York State and to St. Louis Browns baseball tryout camp. And we all thought my brother Saint would make it, you know, that he would be offered something, but they turned out offering me an opportunity to go to join the St. Louis Browns baseball team. And I was kind of excited over that, you know, and then I got home, discussed it with my mother, and she said, you can think about that after you go to college.
Both sides of West Street were completely full with restaurants all the way down the hill. At the bottom of West Street was this beautiful train station. And they really didn't like us kids that lived in the area because we used to open that door and yell in there, and our echo would last for about 15 minutes. Also, there was a beautiful park, and I mean beautiful park. Trees, grass, benches. People used to come there and take their lunch. We as kids played in that park. And I remember all the restaurants were packed all the time. The hotel at the time, which was at the top of the hill, that too was a beautiful building. I remember my grandfather, who was a porter at that hotel, they used to come down to the train station and pick up the bags and carry them up the hill to the hotel. I think I was around 7, maybe 7, 8. That's when I had my first job. I was playing outside the Busy Bee restaurant, and someone was going in, and I was right by the door, so I grabbed the doorknob and pulled the door open, and they gave me a quarter. I stood there all day, refused to leave. All 4 pockets were full of coins. We actually lost 4 neighborhoods because there was West Street, and there was houses on both sides of West Street. Then there was Mill Street, and at this end of Mill Street, as you go under the bridge, the railroad bridge there over by the supermarket. That street was called Satinet Street. Then there was the river, Housatonic River, and then Deering Street, where a lot of Italians lived on Deering Street with wonderful gardens. And the gardens were always by the river. I remember one of the Italian guys used to literally water his garden when the sun went down from a bucket from the river. He had a rope, and he put the bucket in there and hoist it up, and he'd just go from plant to plant. We used to sit on the steps and watch him. It would be impossible in our neighborhood for any kid to get snatched because there was always someone sitting out on the porch. You couldn't walk 2 houses without someone saying, "Does your mother know you're down here?" And we all had gardens. And we as kids used to sit on the steps as our parents sat on the porches. Clap Park, used to go there every Friday night, take our blankets because they had movies every Friday night. I think when they tore down all that, it broke up neighborhoods, which were really always the support groups.
I was a lot into music because my father did provide us musical training when we were kids. You know, I had private teachers, and they were good. Basically, the piano, and then I advanced to the organ, which I enjoy. I think one of the areas I remember was Cincinnati, Ohio, and the other one was Detroit, Michigan. That was I call a mega church at the time. They had about 800 people there. I'm like, that was a lot to me. I was just getting to the place where I would play music, and that way I could contribute to his ministry that way. I said to myself, wow, these people got plenty of people to do their music. They had good drummers and all that stuff. They had a real lively service. Sure enough, he called me up there, and I was holding my little baby like I got to take care of her. Like, don't call me. But he said, oh yeah, somebody grabbed my child. Took that excuse away. I was up there. I just was so nervous. I couldn't hardly see those keys. Boy, but I got over that. So then the pastor, now this happened to be a woman pastor there. And she was saying, were you nervous up there, preacher? I said, I know he wasn't. He started ministering in that church, and they loved the ministry so much, they kept him that whole week. And it turned in that he called me back. He said, what do you think about moving to Pittsfield? And I said, sure, we'll go, because I'm always traveling anyway. Something new, something different. I always like to step back and find out what people are doing. I'm not here to, you get over there, I'm here now. But, I wasn't that type of person, I don't think. And I knew I was in music. I do music.
So this was what year?
1980.
1980.
We moved officially December 80 into Pittsfield.
I worked in biomedical research before I went into full-time ministry. I had a lot of appointments to go and to speak here and there as an evangelist. And so eventually I resigned the research field and went in the full-time ministry. And here I am. Everything seems to all come around full circle. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, all the scientists are atheists and this. I never found that to be true. Quite the contrary, the opposite. A lot of the big shots or the laureates and those people that I worked around were very dedicated people. Because when you look at the world and the backdrop of the universe, it instead of making me disbelieve, it makes me believe.
Would you tell us the name of your church?
The Victory Temple Church of God in Christ.
And yeah,
The Church of God in Christ has about, they say, 8.5 million members worldwide. And the denomination is predominantly black. And you'll find Church of God in Christ just about everywhere. I think the role of the church is multifaceted. Number one, we teach and we preach Christianity, our doctrine, and so forth. But then I believe the church should be socially involved, help the helpless at any cost and measure that we can. I think if a child is in need, they don't have clothes, they don't have shoes, and that type of thing, we ought to provide that. We ought to reach out to people in any way that we can to make life more comfortable.
I had a cousin, and he was going to Virginia State, historically black college. And he was talking about black colleges, which I had never even considered. And he mentioned Howard University, Washington, D.C. My mother and I went down, took the Greyhound. I leave the terminal. Cabs are right lined up. I get in. I said, Howard University. He said, yes, sir. So we start driving. And I see all these black people. Because on TV, whenever they talked about Washington, D.C., you never saw any black people. You know, you saw Congress, or you saw white folks visiting. You didn't see black folks. Well, I was incredulous. I said, what in the world? Is this in Washington, D.C.? Are you? He said, yes, sir. So that was a real eye-opener for me. My father, the story is that his mother and father died when he was 4 or 5. And he was pushed off to an uncle and treated badly. So at 14, he left, just took off. And he was in Georgetown, South Carolina, I guess it was. And some engineers in South Carolina got a job at the GE. And this one engineer, well, all 5 of them missed Southern cooking. And my father was working at this house for this family. And the lady said to my father, would you like to go north and cook for my son and his fellow engineers? So my mother's father and mother had a big house, and they would take in boarders. So when my father got to Pittsfield, he had to have a place to live. He moved in there. And my mother was the youngest of 5. And her mother was very protective. So my father used to say he never got a good look at my mother because she was always flashing by. But finally, he did. He liked what he saw, and she liked him. Just as in the movie The Godfather, the first one, where Michael is courting Apollonia. And they're walking up this road. And then all of a sudden, you see all the people behind them. Well, when my father would take my mother to the movies, one of her brothers was sitting in the back row. It was John, William, Lucy, Jimmy, and my mother. There were 5 of them. Yeah, and she was the youngest. All right. So I like to tell that story whenever I get a chance because it, to your point about the influence that my parents had on the 3 of us, and what was it in their upbringing that made them the way they were.
with the newspaper when we started up the NAACP again in 1983. We named it the NAACP, Climbing Out of Stagnation. We had meetings and we call all the officials together. And one person stays in my mind all the time is Captain Lee. Lee? He used to come to our meetings all the time, and he would bring the police officers, and they had a concern about how the police was treating them, the Afro-Americans. Yeah, we'd go on bus rides, hay rides as we call them. The farmers would give us, we had someone would volunteer truck, fill it with hay. And that's what they sat on. And we would go to Albany, Springfield, Boston, and I reminisce now about the times that we had and the law that was shown. We filed discrimination with the MCA board in Springfield, met with them, and would explain our cases. If anybody had a problem in housing, was discriminated, we would we would go and meet with the establishment, the management. And most of the time, it was settled. Very few cases that we had to pursue. And when you meet, the meeting of the minds, in one setting, you have to come back, nurture it, and make sure it grows. Patient. You have to have patience in order to see wisdom and faith come alive. And if you don't have that, then you can't be a good leader. You gotta listen. Pay attention to people and what they're saying. You may not agree with them, but respect what they're saying and respect the person. Don't get mad with the person, because God didn't make us all alike. And always try to help somebody. Then, as Dr. King said, if you can help somebody as you pass along the way, then your living will not be in vain.
So first we started Youth Alive, Performance Arts.
Right.
Okay. And that came out of the church. We started the Rites of Passage and Empowerment program 6 years ago for girls because we recognized that they needed something from the boys where they were totally focused on themselves. So we created this holistic program. And when we mean holistic, we mean spiritual, find all of it, all of their being. When we went to South Africa 2 years ago, there were a couple of the young ladies that had serious issues with being there. Because you'll have some young people now, African American, I'm not African. They'll quickly tell you that. So just to see that transition that these young women went through, having to acknowledge history because we took them to the slave castle. You can't deny this, folks. Do you see this building? Do you see this sign? Entry of no return. That's where the slaves walked out of and were placed on those boats. Okay? Those were your ancestors. Do you understand this? We took them first to Durban. Mm-hmm. They loved it. We were on the beach. We stayed in a very nice hotel. They shopped. They did all the tourist things.
Yeah.
Okay? We took them to all the tourist sites and the big, beautiful city, the night lights. We wanted them to see the difference in lifestyles, okay? And how most of the people were living. So we loaded them up in the van that Monday morning, rode out to Ilovo, farm country. They could see the shanty towns. It's out in the country or in the bush. It's very basic living, Mm-hmm. So as we left the big city, the kids began to see the differences in the community. And they were like, where are we going? I said, we're going to the orphanage. So I continued my work with the girls. And then we had each of our young ladies to choose a task. So myself and the nurse, we worked in the field because they had a large garden, which they ate out of. Mm-hmm. So we worked in the field. We had some of the girls who volunteered to work in the daycare center. Others worked in the school setting, whatever they chose to do. When they made their presentation, there were some of us that cried. Because they talked about their transition and they were able to talk about being proud of who they are. They were able to talk about the history of the African Americans and they were able to say the words. I mean, they really had internalized it. And it just, it was like, I'm sitting in like, yep, this is it. This is it.